The Trump administration has now announced they are preparing an attack on Iran. The last few weeks, there have been protests that have gotten violent. There have been rioting. There is now a so-called internet blackout that has been announced by the Western mainstream media. Washington has held preliminary talks on a potential Iran strike, according to the Wall Street Journal. The Trump administration has held preliminary discussions on a potential attack on Iran after U.S. President Donald Trump repeated threats to strike the Islamic Republic should the regime kill protesters, which is reported to have been done. This is citing, of course, unnamed protesters. And I'll just share what he said again, that Iran is looking for freedom, perhaps like never before. The USA stands ready to help. So, Elina, what exactly is going on here? Is this just another excuse for the United States to prepare for war with Iran and to wage war against Iran, because the Iranian government has been saying that the violent part of these protests have been backed by the United States, by Israel, and they're citing this exact tweet by Mike Pompeo, Trump's first CIA director, saying that the Iranian regime is in trouble, bringing mercenaries its last hopes, riots in dozens of cities, under siege, 47 years of this regime. POTUS 47. Coincidence? Happy New Year to every Iranian in the streets. Also to every Mossad agent walking beside them.
So, I mean, with regards to Mark Pompeo's not tweet, well, his post anyway, it was actually even pretty much the same information was regurgitated on Israeli media. I think it was on I-24 News, as well as other members of the political establishment inside Israel, within Hebrew media, of course. But what the information has been relayed there is to not believe for a second that especially the riots inside of Iran are just organic, that they're being manufactured essentially, and they were gloating about it by Mossad agents. Now, this is the thing. There are legitimate grievances that the people of Iran do have, very legitimate grievances that the people of Iran have with regards to, obviously, their dire economic conditions, because it's important to understand what happened in September and October of 2025. And that was obviously the fact that the E3 states, that being Germany, France, and the UK, triggered the snapback mechanism, which means that the UN sanctions on Iran have been reimposed back on Iran. And these sanctions were a massive blow to the Iranian economy. It basically has now legally obliged 193 countries around the globe to essentially, which are all member states of the UN, to cut all economic and financial ties with Iran, including sanctioning its all Iranian banks, kicking them and cutting them out of the international financial SWIFT system almost entirely. Sanctioning oil exports, sanctioning all industries inside of Iran. Now, this came as a bit of a shock to the Iranian economic sort of system, and it has to obviously subside. And what did this do? It hit the, it depreciated the Iranian currency by 50% within, a matter of a couple of months. We're seeing massive inflation on products, obviously, because Iran is being economically cut off. We're seeing a chilling effect on businesses, small to medium-sized businesses of the average working class Iranian person. So we can see, and this is a very real impact of what sanctions have, the crippling, impact that they have upon the working class people of Iran. Now, many people have said, well, this is not the first time. I mean, Iran has been sanctioned for, pretty much since the Iranian Revolution in 1979. I'll bet that is true. This was very much the case. In 2015, with the obviously Iran nuclear deal, this somewhat subsided. This was the whole purpose behind obviously the Iran nuclear deal. Of course, when Trump had pulled out in 2017, 2018, this again had actually issued quite a significant blow, because then that meant that to Iran, because the United States had again reasserted unilateral sanctions, but that was just the United States, although it did have secondary sanctions effects on particularly like EU states. But it still meant that other countries around the world, including even the EU to a certain extent, on various degrees, were able to internationally engage in international trade with Iran, as well as financial cooperation. Albeit it was restricted in many ways to a certain extent because of the unilateral U.S. sanctions. Now, what we're seeing is, the Iranian economy and its trade has gone down to pretty much nothing, and it's trying to find a way to stabilize, and obviously navigate a way out of that. And this is a country that up until 2015 was navigating these sanctions before, who was economically weak, and it's only been in the last 10 years that Iran has been gradually been able to build itself up. And this is why BRICS has also played a significant role, and the BRI and these alternative infrastructure, economic and finance and otherwise, that has been established and sort of spearheaded by Russia and China. It has given countries like Iran an ability to be able to engage in international trade and commerce that bypass, obviously, the American, dominated financial infrastructure that has been the main source for Iran's economic asphyxiation. And although that's obviously materializing, the BRICS alliance is still working on a lot of these different alternative financial infrastructures. And so until that becomes all the more proficient, Iran is still going to have to navigate the difficult path of dealing with these Western sanctions. But in the interim, we're seeing these mass protests that are taking place, and this is the entire purpose of economic warfare. This is the entire purpose of having sanctions to begin with. The idea is to asphyxiate a civilian population to such a degree that they will retaliate and turn against their own state apparatus. This is not to say that there haven't been other legitimate grievances against the state of Iran. There have been, but as it currently stands, the situation has become so severe for the Iranian population. Bearing in mind that in June of 2025, we also had the 12-day war, where Israel did hit vital infrastructure and did bring about destruction to certain key economic infrastructures for Iran. That means that the Iranian state has to also spend money to fix, therefore draining Iran of vital resources that could otherwise have spent on its population. We also saw recently Iran was having a water crisis, which again has been brought on by decades worth of sanctions on Iran. And then obviously there is aspects of mismanagement involved in that. So right now we have these protests that are taking place, which are the direct result in many ways of the sanctions warfare. That is their purpose. And it's always good to remember as well that sanctions, although in this case supposedly they're part of the United Nations Resolution 1929, humbly they do violate the very premise of human rights under the UN Charter, because it does constitute as a form of collective punishment on a civilian population. And we have multiple United Nations General Assembly resolutions that have specifically voted against sanctions, even in the case of Cuba, for example, because of the impact that it has, the human cost that the sanctions have overall on the civilian population. But so this is the situation right now in Iran. You have these protests, and at the same time, what's happening? The Western intelligence and Israeli intelligence apparatus are capitalizing on this by infiltrating these protests and therefore generating mass violence in order to destabilize the Iranian current establishment. Because in doing so, it does several things. First of all, it fractures national unity at a point where the United States and Israel is threatening Iran. Right. So you have wars being declared constantly against Iran, especially in the last couple of months, especially with what's happening in Venezuela at the moment. This has also been a warning sign for Iran. And right now, the intelligence apparatus of Iran is having to contend with, as well as its military and policing, the riots inside of Iran, which also creates operational blind spots, which the United States and Israel could also use in its favor to, I guess, ambush Iran at some future point. Simultaneously, the riots are destroying small to medium-sized business, but also, again, vital key infrastructure, which is economically impacting a country that is already being hit heavily by sanctions. How are these rioters helping their country? The entire point of these protests is to express the grievance of the Iranian people with regards to the impact of these sanctions on Iran, and yet these rioters are destroying property, infrastructure that actually therefore means you're putting more pressure on the state that's then going to have an impact on the Iranian people in order to fix the infrastructure. So what I would actually argue is that there's obviously a strong basis to say that these rioters and these legitimate protests are being capitalized on by the Western intelligence apparatus, by the Israeli intelligence apparatus. This was the purpose of these sanctions to begin with. And I actually am of the opinion this would, in my opinion, be the ideal time to strike Iran. It would be. There's mass chaos in Iran at the moment. You have obviously the pro-Islamic Republic protests going on, but you have the anti-Islamic Republic protests that are occurring, or the ones that are just basically calling for, some economic changes, I guess, and putting pressure on the state to deal with the economic repercussions that the sanctions are having on the people. Then you have these rioters who are destroying infrastructure. It's the key time for Israel and the United States if they wanted to strike Iran. And I will actually also add one last point. A few months ago, I was reading a piece by the Wall Street Journal, and there was I can't remember who, but it was an expert from, I think it was the Atlantic Council. And what he had actually said is that we're going to start seeing a new approach to how Iran is being dealt with. And what he had actually said, and what I found interesting, is that we're going to see what Israel did to Gaza, basically, the concept of mowing the lawn, basically systematically targeting Iran every few months, in order to basically deplete its infrastructure, gradually erode at it, and therefore weakening its economy in conjunction with the sanctions. This is part and parcel of the objective to basically weaken the Iranian government and to essentially dismantle it. And I can see that this is probably most likely what could potentially happen. But then, having said that, can the Israel and the United States, specifically Israel, be able to manage Iranian retaliation? We saw what happened to Israel the last time. It almost got another week and it would have been annihilated. And the United States basically used up the vast majority of its THAAD missile interceptors, which, I mean, it used about 115 and it produces about 55 a year. So how are you going to make up those numbers? So it's very interesting what's going to happen. But like I said, we're dealing with a very desperate hegemon. And they're going to try to do what they can to weaken Iran, because Iran is central to China's BRI, to, I guess, pushing back against Western imperialism in West Asia, and, in doing so, weakening the United States, ability to control global commerce and finance, etc. So Iran is a very central pillar in that.
I think a lot of the panic right now is that Iran will, quote unquote, crack down on the color revolutionists to the point where this eventually ends. And so now you have the United States talking openly about a strike. But the evidence is pouring in, Elina, of the U.S. and Israel's involvement, if we can even separate the two. But a lot of the focus and attention has been on Israel. Here is what the Jerusalem Post said early on. Mossad spurs Iran protests, says agents with demonstrators in Farsi message. As protests grow across Iran, the Mossad posted an unusual Farsi message urging demonstrators to act, saying it's with them in the streets amid the rising economic pressure and tension. Then the Cradle reported on this. An Israeli minister has admitted Mossad agents are operating inside of Iran. Israel's heritage minister, Amichai Eliyahu, has said that Israeli agents are operating inside Iran amid protests sparked by the collapse of the rial and a deepening economic crisis. He spoke to Israeli army radio, saying Israel deployed operatives on the ground during the 12-day war with Iran last June, and suggested similar activity is currently taking place. Now, the evidence just continues to mount and mount and mount. Haaretz just wrote that there was an Israeli covert influence operation using fake accounts in AI-generated content to promote Iran's exiled crown prince, Reza Pahlavi, and push for restoring the monarchy. And here is that piece in particular, saying that early in 2023, Pahlavi made his first official visit to Israel, the son of the last Shah, overthrown by the Islamic Revolution. He visited the visit by the Iranian crown prince, then intelligence minister, his host, Gila Gamliel, was covered by the Israeli media, and reports echoed an official line. The visit was proof that there's no animosity between the Israeli and Iranian peoples, but only between the government and the regime. And then it goes on to talk about the details of this influence operation. But there's a deep connection between the so-called opposition sitting outside of Iran and what's going on. I mean, there's a smoking gun here, Elina. This is there's a huge element of foreign interference here.
Oh yeah, there is, and they're very open about it. This is the thing; they're very open about it because it's also part of the PSYOPs operation to try to demoralize Iran, to try to demoralize its own intelligence and military apparatus and its political establishment by saying, we're functioning, we're in your country, and we're going to destabilize it. And I think it was even on Twitter. They even changed the or X rather. They changed the Islamic Republic of Iran's flag with the former flag of Iran under the Shah. I mean, so you're seeing all these kind of, I guess, psyops that are currently also unraveling from the Western intelligence apparatus as a whole to try to demoralize and undermine Iran. But the reality is, I mean, the reality of the situation is there's only so much that they can do. My personal opinion is that they're going to capitalize on the sanctions. They're going to continue to, yes, advance and push, for riots to demoralize and fracture Iranian society. And which right now, like I said before, if you're going to have a unified defense against Western imperialism or aggression inside of Iran, you need the peoples to be united. That is now not necessarily the case inside of Iran. As far as I see it, the West doesn't have the military capacity to be able to handle full-scale war with Iran, but it does have the capacity to inflict as much economic turmoil inside Iran by possibly targeting and striking them again and again, weakening its infrastructure in conjunction with the sanctions so as to weaken Iran. And obviously that would be a major sort of, I guess, way to try to coerce if the establishment, if the government in Iran wants to remain, to probably try to use the same tactics as they're trying to use in Venezuela, and that is to coerce them to capitulate to key demands that the West has in order to, I guess, ease the tensions and ease the sanctions. So I think it's a very difficult time for Iran at the moment, my humble opinion, because, yes, it's at the crosshairs at the moment of the battle between, I guess, the rise of a multipolar world and the United States and its attempts to sustain global hegemony. Because we know for a fact that Israeli intelligence is very prominent inside of Iran. I mean, we saw when the leader of the Hamas political bureau was killed in 2024, in July of 2024. It was in Iran, and inside of his room. And we during the 12th Day War, when Israel started made the preemptive attacks inside Iran, they already had agents inside of Iran that had deactivated their air defense systems, which actually allowed Israel to be able to ambush Iran quite significantly on the first day, including, after the 12th Day War, we found the Iranian intelligence found multiple warehouses where Mossad was essentially setting base and even building weapons, which now could easily be given to rioters in order to exploit the protests right now in Iran. So this is the thing. The West still has a capability to, it still has very powerful intelligence apparatus that knows how to manipulate public opinion, can infiltrate public opinion, and can mobilize in ways that demoralize and undermine. And this is something that, Iran, as it currently stands, has to be very careful going forward, because it's a very volatile time.
It's not just all anti-Iranian government activity, but here's just a massive protest in support of the current Iranian government. This is supported by other examples. Here's Press TV. Despite what is actually in effect a heavy internet crackdown, here are other images of protests that have been happening in support of a government. So obviously, there is not some kind of universal anti-government sentiment. And the foreign interference, especially the interference from the U.S. and Israel, had the evidence of that has piled up. And it appears, Elina, that the U.S. and Israel lost their surprise factor during the 12-Day War. I would say similar in Venezuela, where there's coming out with new information now that the U.S. used some sonic weapons to kind of paralyze certain Venezuelan armed forces who were operating air defense systems, so they couldn't. We know that the U.S. was sabotaging as much as they could from the inside in Venezuela, but still not able to go far enough for full regime change. In Iran, during the 12-Day War, similar kind of thing. there was a surprise attack, and it really did hurt Iran for the first day and a half. And then
Mhm.
suddenly Iran was ready to respond. Do you see the outcome of this being any different then? Because here there is no surprise. The color revolution is right there in their face, and the Israeli and U.S. support with it.
Yeah, I think, it's very important for the Iranian people right now to, I guess, maintain a sense of unified integrity against what could possibly happen. I still do think that there's a vulnerability that's currently manifesting inside of Iran with these protests that are currently ongoing, because they are larger than other protests in the past, and and it also comes at a time where Western imperialism it's kind of on its last legs, and it's rather desperate. So it's they're going to do whatever necessary to try to weaken Iran, and it is, like I said earlier, it is the protests and the internalized dichotomies within Iranian society, because, like you showed in these videos, there's also many Iranians that are very much in support or trying to keep loyal to their state, because I think they understand the overarching, I guess, imperialist goals in their country and what that kind of fragmentation would mean for them. However, if Iran doesn't get some sort of hold over what's happening, it does expose them to certain vulnerabilities that Israel and the United States could exploit. But I think for me, and what I like to highlight specifically, it's the economic, I guess, uh, vulnerability that Iran is now under because of the snapback mechanisms that were triggered, a couple of months ago, and what that means for the Iranian economy. And of course, yes, it now has established relations with China and Russia, especially, who are able to provide it some sort of a safeguard. But we still have a bit of a path ahead in terms of developing the kind of infrastructure to really give Iran, as well as Venezuela, that type of financial independence to completely have the ability to break away from, I guess, the West's ability to control. So I don't think, it's completely, it's a dire situation and Iran's going to fall tomorrow. No, it's not about that. But they have to be vigilant at the moment. They have to make sure they crack down on the Israeli intelligence agents inside of Iran, which have been running rampant now inside of Iran for quite a long time, and simultaneously try to bring a sense of calm to the Iranian people so much as is possible, to bring a sense of unity so that it's not exploited. Because yes, I do feel like they will. I think the West, whether they have the capacity or not, they're going to strike Iran again, even if they know they're going to take several hits, if it means weakening their economy to a degree that it will collapse at some point later in the future. And like I said before, it also works to destabilize China's relations with Iran and its grander projects in terms of like the BRICS bloc and all these other trading, I guess, opportunities that come with that. So again, destabilization. That's what the United States does best. Going around destabilizing countries and states so that they divide and rule, exploit their resources, exploit their capacity, or deter their abilities to be able to work and collaborate with alternative partners such as China. So I think it's just something that we have to be wary about. But hopefully, the state will be able to manage that.
We talk a lot about the declining U.S. empire, decline of U.S. imperialism, crisis of U.S. imperialism, but none of that means that it's bad at everything. And this is one thing that one of the few weapons that it has left at its disposal. If we look at the dollar, if we look at nuclear weapons, and then we look at this, maybe the three biggest left. I know you've gotten a lot of maybe pushback from some when you say that people need to focus on sovereignty first, that the preservation of the current Iranian arrangement politically is very important, and it has to come first, even above economic demands. I know that you've received some pushback from this, but look at what these protesters are doing, Elina. Exactly what you have said, that they are burning religious institutions. They are burning supermarkets. They are torching hospitals and fire engines. And this is vital infrastructure. This is infrastructure that people need just to live in a society. So, in effect, I think we see the link between sovereignty and the very economic strains that are maybe one of the push factors that have led to this current moment in Iran.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, look, if Iran was to collapse tomorrow, or if the regime was to collapse tomorrow, what comes next? I mean, something I've asked a lot of people is like, okay, the protesters in the streets, and I understand their grievances, but what is it that they're seeking? The Iranian state, the Iranian government is currently in a very difficult situation because of the sanctions, and they've got to find a way to be able to manage that. And it's also worth noting, by the way, that although there's many that would also argue, yes, but there's also corruption within the state itself, albeit that is true, we also have to remember that, interestingly, and this is something that I think people don't ever really think about, I guess the kind of corruption especially in the case of Iran, the corruption of the state is also in many ways facilitated by the 4 decades long of sanctions. Because I mean, when you don't really have the ability to engage in international trade and commerce in the most legitimate way, you have to find other established parallel economic sort of means by which to, I guess, govern and bring wealth into a state or manage it, so to speak. So in many ways, I've even argued that actually the sanctions that the West has imposed on Iran has actually created, in many ways, the kind of what especially a lot of people in the West would argue is a somewhat more repressive, I guess, establishment, and as well as obviously the poverty, among other things, but also, I guess, the more parallel economy that exists inside of Iran over the years. But I guess what I'm trying to say is this: if Iran was to collapse tomorrow, or the government was supposed to collapse tomorrow, what comes next? What are the Iranian people seeking exactly? What kind of governance are they looking for? Are they looking for a liberalized economy? Does that mean they would like to work with the United States? What is it that they're seeking? And I don't think that there's a very clear picture in that. And that's also one of the reasons why the movement can easily be hijacked by the West and their own agenda, because there's no real clear goal as to, I feel like, what Iranians want. And with regards to the state, I think if it wants to alleviate some of the pressure, the economic pressure on the people, they would have to enter negotiations with Trump. Because I think it was yesterday when Trump came out and said, he very openly said yesterday, it's going to get a lot worse for Iran unless basically you re-enter negotiations with the United States. I mean, this is a direct threat, understanding that the economic turmoil that Iran is currently in, which is leading to the frustration of Iranians who have been enduring this economic turmoil for decades, is the direct cause of the snapback mechanisms, and obviously the U.S. sanctions, and the U.S. more broadly. And so I think that if Iran fell, it would be, it would allow the U.S. It would be open to corporate capture by the West. Humbly, it would be open to corporate capture, and that's precisely what led to the revolution in Iran in the first place. Because Iran, prior to the revolution of 1979, was actually being exploited, and its resources were stolen. A lot of that wealth wasn't really being trickled down into the vast majority of the public. Yes, there was a bit of an aristocratic and middle class that was seeing the benefits of that, but not to the overwhelming majority of Iranian people. Will that be the future for Iran going forward? But also Iran's connection to obviously the broader West Asian, I guess, resistance factions that have been the single force inside of West Asia that has pushed back against Western imperialism in the region. That would be completely, I guess, dismantled. And what does that mean for the broader region and its ability to be able to push back against Western imperialism? And then if we were to even broaden it from there, what does that mean for China in terms of being able to establish its own goals? What does that mean for BRICS? What does that mean for the BRI and all these other alternative sort of trade routes and cooperation that is sort of like the basis for a multipolar world? This is why I say Iran is very important, and if it was to fall, it would impact, I guess, global liberation struggles, the ability to, I guess, establish a multipolar world. It would be a severe impediment on that, but also it would have long-term repercussions on the people of Iran itself, because it would be open to, I guess, foreign interests and forms of exploitation. So if we're looking about liberating Iranian people, first, I think the Western imperialism first has to be significantly weakened, and then with time there will be organic changes inside of